Welcome to the Ascension Program podcast. I'm your host, Momita Paul, and today we are going to explore how relationship challenges can hinder our spiritual and personal growth. So, those of you who are already partnered and you may be experiencing relationship conflicts, you might be wondering, how can I experience personal and spiritual growth when I'm constantly in conflicts? So, in today's world of quick divorce, I have an expert here who is married for 40 years. Let's welcome Dr. Gay Hendricks. Welcome, Dr. Hendricks.
Thank you, Mamita. Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, I am so honored that you took the time to speak with me and as well as our audience today. So, I'll give you a little bit background. Dr. Gay is a PhD in counseling psychology from Stanford University. With more than 35 years of experience, he has founded the Hendricks Institute for Relationship Transformation and Body Mind Therapies. And later, he co founded its charitable organization, the Foundation for Conscious Living. He is the host of the Big Leap podcast with Mike Koenigs. He has appeared on more than 500 radio and television shows, including the Oprah, the CNN, the CNBC, 48 Hours, and others. His website is hendricks.com. So, Dr. Gay, I would like to quote from your book, Learning to Love Yourself. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about your experience. So, here's the quote from your book. I was at a crisis point in my work. For many years, I had been searching for answer to one question. How can we bring about change in ourselves? In a flash, I realized I had been looking outside myself for answers. I had never really turned the question over to my own experience. I phrased a question in my mind. What is the one thing we can do to bring about transformation? Another question spontaneously bubbled up. How can I deal with negative feelings so that they do not recycle? And then another. What is the one thing I could do to make my life flow freely and easily? A second or two later, the answers to those questions shot through me, not intellectually, but in the form of electric wave, of ecstatic sensation that swept up my body from my legs to head. So when I read this section of the book, I cannot even describe how much I have tried to recreate that experience for myself. So I was so fascinated with that experience you described in the body because it's like a more of a body experience, not an intellectual one. So I want you to fully describe that experience of receiving the answer as an electric wave. And how can we recreate this? Like, how did this even happen?
It was one of the most life-changing experiences that I've ever had. And it happened in August 1974. But I feel it like it happened yesterday or this morning. I think one of the keys to it, if you want to recreate that experience for yourself, Mamita, is make sure you're asking a question you really want to know. Because that question I was asking myself were questions that were deeply important to me, like how to deal with negative feelings like anger or sadness or fear. I was just at the time having some problems with my girlfriend, and it was bringing up a lot of fear in me. And Katie, my wife now, we've been together for 44 years, but this was in my pre-Katie era. I wanted to know how to deal with negative feelings. And I also, this question about what is the one thing that we really need to know in order to transform ourselves in every moment, to be our own therapist, to be our own coach, to be our own guru all the time. There's nothing wrong with having a coach or a guru, a therapist, or anything else, as long as that person reminds you that you are 100% responsible for yourself. Any guru that says, I will take away your pain, go the other direction, avoid
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Those are exactly like you have nailed it. Yes, please go on.
Yes. So I was out in a forest in Green Mountain Falls, Colorado, and I was walking around And the next week, I was going to start my university career at the University of Colorado as a professor in the counseling psychology department. That had been my dream for many, many, many years. And so my dream had come true. And I was only a week from starting. And I'd moved out to Colorado to kind of get a feel for the place. So there I was walking around in the forest, and I was asking this question. And I was realizing I've always asked a question out there. I've asked a teacher, or I've asked a book, or I've listened to an expert. One thing I've never done is just ask the question and then let it come however it comes, to trust the universe to answer the question, not some other person. And that was an unusual idea for me. I don't know where I got that idea, but as I was standing out there in the forest, I just did that. I said, okay, what is the one thing I need to know in order to transform myself? And how do I deal with my shadowy negative feelings? I just kind of stood there and nothing happened for a moment. And then all of a sudden, this, I call it electric, but it's kind of like a huge energy wave, like if you've ever had a thrill, kind of this wave of energy up your body. It was so strong that I just walked around. I say I reeled around for a while feeling it because it was so strong. I almost felt like I was drunk or something. Uh, Although I hasten to point out that all I had that morning was a cup of decaffeinated coffee. I wasn't in any kind of altered state of consciousness. So this just happened organically.
How
And
old were you at that time?
how old?
Yeah,
29.
that's amazing. You really trusted the process. Please go on.
Yes. And so I stood there and it just kept going and going and going. And partway through it, I had this, I don't know what to call it, but it was a whole body experience of realizing that love really is the answer, and that love can be used for healing. And the only way to do that is to surrender and give it permission to go wherever it needs to go. And so I realized that it's loving ourselves and allowing the actual experience, not thinking about it, but actually feeling that experience of loving yourself, that does the healing. And so as I was out there in the forest, I just started doing that. And the actual message was, you can feel, I mean, you can heal anything you can feel and love. That was the kind of the idea that came. And that the thing to do instead of going away from our experience is to let ourselves experience it fully. And so I let myself experience these waves and waves and waves. And I don't know to this day how long it lasted. I guessed 45 minutes, but it could have been a half an hour. It could have been, but it didn't really matter because the whole time, what was happening was I was just finding one thing after the other that I didn't love in myself. And I was loving it for the first time. And
So
so
did
I
you
love,
experience any resistance, like when you were trying to love yourself? Didn't you experience any kind of resistance coming up? Like, no, this is the part
well,
that has
no,
done mistakes. I do not wish to love, that kind of a thing.
I mostly experienced that in my mind. My mind was trying to say, No, this is too simple. This is too simple. Because I had a PhD. I had to make things very complicated. and But this was very simple, that our problems are caused by unloved aspects of ourselves.
Yes.
And if we can open up and find those things and love them as they are, then we're free of them. And I just tested it out there. I was a research psychologist, so I tested it out over and over again with things like I was overweight at the time. So loving my body for being too fat, loving my sadness. my father died while my mother was pregnant with me. And so I never knew my father in real life. And I think up until that moment in the forest, I'd always felt this kind of a aching, missing, not having a father, and hadn't even realized I had that, But in that, I was being very honest with myself as I walked around out in the forest there, loving myself. And I realized that there was this empty place inside me that was caused because I never had a father to connect with. And I didn't know what to do about that. Later on, I, did some therapy my own about that and developed some good friendships with male authority figures and things like that that helped kind of replace that feeling. But at the time, it felt like this big, empty aching in my chest. And so I stood there and loved and loved and loved that until it wasn't there. I just loved it as it is. And here's the thing, when you love something as it is, it starts to loosen up and becomes energy. So I loved all of those things until they felt like they shifted inside me. And
Did you feel the shift? Like, how did it feel like? How did you know that it has shifted?
well, I knew it in two ways. First of all, the that feeling of loving myself, it caused all of these kind of sweet feelings inside me. Like being in love, but being in love with me for the first time, feeling like I was falling in love for the first time inside myself. In my mind, I also had this piece of wisdom that wasn't there before. It was the answer to my question about what is the one thing we need to do. And ultimately, the one thing we need to do is accept ourselves as we are and then go beyond that and love ourselves as we are.
Oh my God, this is sounds like, I have been trying to do that since I read your book in, I think, 2023. So I don't know, how do I frame it? So there are people who have experienced deep shame, trauma, and also since I have like experience with narcissistic abuse where, you're gaslit and you start questioning yourself, the severe self-doubt that comes where you're really wondering, am I right, am I wrong, like, this doesn't, the perfectionism that comes with the trauma, that, oh,
Yeah.
I have to be this, otherwise I'm not perfect or I am not lovable. And it runs so deep that even though I know that I need to accept myself exactly the way I am, I find it so hard. I find it so difficult. So when I read your book, where you were asking to love ourselves, I tried to create that feeling of love, and it felt so alien to me. I just couldn't do it. So I had to actually modify your technique into a loving affirmation, like just simply saying the words that I love myself instead of actually feeling the feeling that you were describing, because it was so hard for me to recreate that feeling given the resistance I felt that no,
Mm-hmm.
I don't deserve this, the unworthiness. So I know you don't use traditional therapy terms like ego states or parts therapy in that book, at least. So given this is the state of being me, and I know many of my clients also experience, even the audience who's listening to this recording. So how can we create that sensation of love when we have so much trauma, so much self-doubt, so much perfectionism, so much not accepting ourselves, like even though intellectually we understand this is what is going to heal us, we have so much difficulty creating that emotion for ourselves. Where do we start? Like the simplest, smallest way where we can genuinely create that sensation and maybe expand. But where do we even start?
Here's exactly where to start. Like right now, Mamita, think of someone you know for sure that you love.
That would be my sister.
Think about your sister and tell me what you find lovable about her.
Her innocence, her naivete, her childlike joy and excitement, which she usually suppresses even now that she has grown older. Her simplicity, like just being her, I guess.
So you admire her and you've had a lot of positive experiences with her growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the key thing is, you love her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now I want you to love yourself just like you love her.
Mm-hmm.
Just take a moment and feel that. Feel love for yourself, just like the love you feel for her, for your sister.
So now I'm getting more intellectual. It's like, which part of me do I even love?
Mm, yeah. So take a moment and think of the thing that's hardest for you to love.
That is the hardest part to love, the inner critic.
Yeah. So take a moment and love that fear down in there, the fear that I'm not going to measure up. Just feel that kind of same love you feel for your sister, but feel it for your own fear. I would start there and work on that one. Just every day for a few minutes, set aside a little meditation time and just think of people you know for sure you love, and then flip that love around so it's going this direction rather than going out.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
more you learn to love yourself, the even better you'll learn to love your sister.
So tell me about your book, The Big Leap Year. I know you have a podcast that goes by the same or similar name. What inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, the your big leap year. I'm just have a copy of it here on my desk. Um, I actually wrote it because people kept asking for it. After the big leap came out for about 15 years ago now, a lot of those people started writing me, emailing me, and saying, "Hey, could you break this down into a day at a time book?" Because I had one of those that I wrote way back about 30 years ago, and it's been very popular. It's called A Year of Living Consciously. And so that was the genesis of it, was just to provide 1 day lessons. And in the book, by the way, most of the lessons are only a minute or two or 5 minutes that takes you to do it. So it's not like it's going to tie up your whole day or anything. It gives you something to meditate on or focus on for that day. So, and it's got 366 days because 1 day is a leap year every 4 years. So we wanted to cover uh, that day. A lot of the people saying that it took everything that's in the big leap and just made it simpler and made it possible to do something every day. And so I'm very proud of it.
I actually like the fact that the work that you are putting in words in any of your books, actually you try and test it out. It's not like some random theory you picked it up from somewhere. It's like you are actually using it in your own life, which is why when you said that it gets harder and harder and harder to write that book, I can feel it myself because I believe in the same thing. Like doing it first, trying it out on myself first before I actually present it to somebody. Because when they are going to use it, they are going to go through the same obstacles that I did. And if I haven't tried it myself, how can I guide them to overcome those things?
That's exactly what I have found also. I was going to call it rare, but maybe it's not rare, but I haven't found a lot of that way of thinking out there in the self-help world. You know,
That is alarming. Actually, I'm glad that you brought it up because this is something I had been noticing. But I'm glad you brought it up because sometimes I wonder, like, should I be really thinking about that? Should that be my focus? But I really get concerned with the
Mhm.
amount of things people say others to do, which they themselves don't do, or they're hiding the actual things that they do because they don't want to reveal their secrets. I don't know what's going on in their mind, but I'm glad you brought it up. You want to talk about it?
I think a lot of people may have an experience, and before they've had a chance to test it out very much, they start teaching it. I've always been, even when I was a kid, I was kind of evidence based. I wanted to see the bottom line, like, but I've always wanted to know, how does this thing work? And I have the kind of mind that if I look at something, I can see how it works. It kind of prints itself out for me. And so that came in very useful when I started writing books like Learning to Love Yourself and the Big Leap. The only way to do things like that, in my opinion, is to make sure you are so deeply grounded in the experience that it's part of you. It's not just a technique you know how to teach. But you're very young still. You have plenty of time to have that deep, rich experience of learning to love yourself. In developmental psychology, we say your 20s are for experimentation. Try on different jobs, try on different relationships, that kind of thing. In your 30s, you find your life. In your 40s, you build your life. So if you think of that, don't expect yourself to have it all figured out yet. It's important for you where you are to keep focusing on those feelings and sensations and get your inner world so it's just humming with these ideas. And that just takes a little bit of time and application. You've probably seen people where they dip the cloth in the dye and then you hang it up to dry for a day and then you dip it again. And after you do that 20 or 30 times, it won't fade anymore. But it's the drying it out that's just important as the dipping it. You've got to dip and dry, dip and dry, dip and dry many, many times. You've got to experience loving yourself and then not loving yourself. And then you remember it again and love yourself. And then you forget all about it. And then you remember yourself.
This is exactly what I really loved about your book, because this is so humane. Like, it sounds so natural, because that's how we are. We find something that made us feel good and then we forget about it because of our habits and our pattern. And then again, we remind ourselves, oh, no, no, let's love ourselves. And then again, we forget about it. So when you were talking about the drying part, I was going to ask you, which part of the healing is the drying? And you mentioned it.
So it's very human to drift, to make a vow or a New Year's resolution and then blow it. What I want people to get good at is taking an ah so attitude to when they blow it. Oh, I blew it. Ah so, let me recommit. Just like the
What would
automatic.
you say for people who kind of are so hard on themselves, like they don't even want to recommit? It's like the feeling of failure. Oh, I'm failing so many times, might as well give it up. This is what I tell my clients who are like, they have tried few times and they forget, or out of habit, like just lose. Uh, so I keep telling them that it's okay to forget, just come back. It's
Yeah,
okay.
just come back.
But some
We
people
here
give up. Like what makes you, or what would you advise such people, that what would keep you motivated to not give up when you're forgetting or when you're failing to love yourself? Or like, how can they recenter, bring back themselves?
well, most of the time people do that because they start to feel more pain. And that reminds them to get back on track again. So we have a saying here: catch the drift and make the shift. In other words, notice when you're drifting and make the commitment again. Notice when you're drifting, make the commitment. But I know what you're talking about. I used to work with a lot of obese people, and they would start a new diet and they would eat really well breakfast and lunch. Then maybe in the afternoon, they'd have a stick of chewing gum, which wasn't on their diet. And then they would use that as kind of, they would go crazy. Okay, I've had my stick of gum. I might as well go out and eat a gallon of ice cream. So they have that
Beating
kind of,
up themselves.
yeah. And then it starts the whole cycle of feeling bad again. But just remember this one thing: down at the bottom of it all is something that we need to accept about ourselves and love about ourselves. So acceptance and loving ourselves are the key. And if you just keep reminding yourself of that, it catches eventually and it begins to, catch on. But here's the thing: I ask people, how long did it take you to get this problem? And everybody says, okay, well, I'm 50 years old now. I've had it since I can remember, since I went to school for the first time. Well, you shouldn't expect a 50-year-old problem like that to go away overnight. I mean, if somebody says they have a miracle drug that'll make you do that, run the other direction. That's the way dope dealers talk. Here, I've got the solution to all your problems.
So I'll be shifting gears a little bit. I'll be coming back to our main theme that I wanted to touch upon a little bit, which is relationship, because I have heard my friends complain about it a lot, my clients and people even on the internet. I'm noticing, I mean, this is something that has been there, but there's like kind of an uprising where people don't want to be in a relationship anymore because it's too hard just loving yourself or loving another person. We have entered like a me culture, like what is there for me rather than the love itself. So in your website you mentioned about being married to Katie for 40 years and that your relationship with her is like a living laboratory for conscious loving, and all your relationship advice are also tried and tested in your relationship. I had also read your book Hearts in Harmony, where you discussed how to tackle various challenges in relationships. So, what do you feel based on your experience with in your work? What are the top challenges that cause most relationship to start falling apart, and how can we avoid those from happening?
Well, there are challenges that are challenges in the material world, and then there are challenges inside. Like, for example, if you're married or have kids, there are generally four things that married couples fight about: sex, money, the kids, and chores. Those four things. I call that a material world challenge because you wouldn't have had that unless you got into a household and started living with other people. But there are challenges inside that are probably more important because relationship has to be viewed as something that will reveal your deeper parts of yourself. If you understand that, then when those things come up, you'll deal with them. But a lot of people have they've shut the door on their feelings. They've shut the door on ever being happy. They don't think that's a possibility. If a bird comes in and everybody else in its family can fly, but it won't fly, there's tremendous pressure on it to learn to fly. Well, I think human beings feel the same pressure inside as we do trying to meet up with outside because we're always either opening up to or trying to get away from the unlovable things in ourselves. And so people will go to great lengths to get away from those. I mean, we have 1,000 people a day die from alcoholism in my country. 1,000 people a day die from cigarette addiction, tobacco addiction. 1,000 people a day, 350,000 people a year would rather smoke or drink than look into what's real inside themselves. I mean, learning how to deal with your fear or your anger or your sadness is exactly the same as learning to recognize being hungry or having to go to the bathroom. But we don't get any practice in it. In fact, oftentimes people try to talk us out of our feelings, like there's something wrong with them that they shame us for. That happened to me a lot as a kid because I was a sensitive kid, and I grew up at a time too when people got physically punished a lot more than they do now. And so I was the subject of many beatings with a belt and a piece of wood and whatever came to hand. Um, but it was always about the same thing. It was trying to make me be somebody I wasn't. And a lot of or trying to help me feel something or not feel something that I did feel, but wasn't popular to talk about. And in many families, different feelings are taboos. Like some families, it's okay to be angry all the time, but nobody gets to cry. Or people cry all the time, but nobody gets to be angry. Or people get scared and don't get. And so there's a lot of taboos that go on just at the individual level in families about our feelings. Then you get out into the big old world and you meet other people that have that same kind of traumas. I used to do a lot of corporate consulting where I would go into boardrooms or executive suites where there was maybe 3 people or 4 people that were stuck on some problem. and they were ripping each other apart. And you know what would always solve the problem, though, is we would get underneath the beliefs and the thoughts and to get into the sensations and feelings. You know, like I go in and there'll be these three billionaires fighting with each other. And within an hour, they're sitting there in touch with their sadness and stuff, sitting there crying together. You know, to me, that's a miracle. And,
Yeah.
you know, that things like that occur. That's why human beings don't ever try to convince me that human beings can't change, because I've seen so many people come out of the most difficult situations. Like I had a woman in here who was experiencing a lot of trauma about how she was born, because she was born in a concentration camp in Germany at the end of the war. And so, in other words, she was born to a set of parents that were in that concentration camp. And then the camp was liberated. And so they got out. And, but she's carried around a lot of that. So I was working with her in my office here, and I have a little cat door on my office so my cats can come and go. Um, and my little cat, Lucy, came jogging in when she saw that the woman was going through a lot of this old Holocaust trauma. And she came right up to her and just nuzzled her leg the whole time she was going through the emotion. And it was interesting. As soon as she got through it, you know, she looked down at and Lucy and just cried. And Lucy, as soon as it was over, though, she very politely got up and left the room again.
Left. She did her
And
job.
yeah, if cats and dogs can do that, for sure, human beings can. You
Oh,
know,
yes.
so
Oh, yes. Sometimes
we,
simply our presence is enough. We don't even need to do any kind of therapy or healing. Sometimes simply lending somebody that presence to just allow themselves to release whatever they're holding on to is enough. Based on your experience with your wife as well as working with clients when it came to relationship, like, would you like to say there are some key indicators in identifying your soulmate or the right partner? Is there something like that at all? Or like what is your thought about it?
I think person, the perfect person appears that will facilitate you in a relationship. And it's happening for the other person. You are appearing in their life for a particular reason. And I want to say a word about a couple of the problems that go wrong in relationship. Probably the fundamental one is people don't speak honestly to each other. They don't say, I'm angry with you. They say,
Yeah,
fine, you know, or
yeah, yeah. Oh my God,
yeah,
that is the biggest, the communication breakdown, like not being authentic with their own emotions.
yeah. So failure to speak the truth. And on the flip side of that, the healing value of speaking the truth. That's very key. But there's a whole second factor, Mamita, that is about taking healthy responsibility. It's about seeing something, and instead of going into the victim position and saying, you are the reason I'm feeling miserable, it's going, how did I set up this so that I feel miserable all the time? It's that kind of responsibility. It's not blaming yourself, it's owning yourself. It's being able to open up and be honest with yourself.
So you brought up a very important point here, and I wanted to touch about it because I personally have not being able to differentiate between what you said about blaming yourself and being responsible for your feelings. So we tend to often slip into the self blame, blaming. I tend to slip into that pattern of self blame. Oh, maybe I'm responsible for it without any questioning when you have been years of conditioning. So, how do you catch yourself from slipping into the self blame versus being responsible for your feelings? How would you differentiate, first of all?
It takes practice, but you have to start with commitment. You have to make a commitment to owning your responsibility for the things that you're responsible for. People make a mistake in thinking that two people form a relationship that's 100%. In real life, you got 200%, and each person has to take 100% for their part over here and over here. You can't get over here and say, okay, what's my 50% and what's your 50%? It just doesn't work that way. It only works with 100%. In other words, each person has to take 100% responsibility. Responsibility is very different from blame and fault finding. Most of us get confused about that because all we've
Exactly.
heard is blame and fault finding.
Yeah, yes, yes. So how do
Yeah,
we differentiate? How do we know that, okay, here I am compassionately being responsible for my emotion versus feeling
yes.
guilty or blaming myself?
Let me give you a simple way to do it. Feel how different it feels if you point to yourself, like to take responsibility, and you say, you do it with wonder. Hmm, how come I set it up this way? Why would I be in a relationship right now with somebody that criticizes me all the time? Hmm, rather than you criticize me all the time. How did I set it up this way? That's the key move is you have to gently take responsibility. But a lot of people aim so much hate at themselves that the idea of loving themselves sounds impossible.
Yeah.
But I say that if you can always remember that at the bottom of everything is something that needs to be loved and accepted, just get good at asking that question. What is it in me that I need to love and accept right now?
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Hendricks, for sharing those important nuggets of information. There is a lot that I learned given where I am at, and with all the knowledge that I have, I felt like deeply enlightened with what you shared. Thank you so much for taking this time